Take a look at this paragraph from George Orwell's famous essay on politics and the English language. He says, "Now, it is clear that the decline of a language must ultimately have political and economic causes. It is not due simply to the bad influence of this or that individual writer. But an effect can become a cause, reinforcing the original cause and producing the same effect in an intensified form, and so on indefinitely. A man may take to drink because he feels himself to be a failure and then fail all the more completely because he drinks. It is rather the same thing that is happening to the English language. It becomes ugly and inaccurate because our thoughts are foolish. But the slovenliness of our language makes it easier for us to have foolish thoughts. The point is that the process is reversible. Modern English, especially written English, is full of bad habits which spread by imitation and which can be avoided if one is willing to take the necessary trouble." Now, Orwell has an argument here, but it's not so clear-cut as some of the arguments we've studied in previous lessons. The big claim that Orwell's making is that modern writing in English has become ugly and inaccurate. And his primary reason, his evidence statement, is that writers have developed bad habits that have spread by imitation. But these ideas weren't just plainly laid out in a place where I could find them. I had to do a little bit of thinking. Arguments aren't always clearly laid out. Many people don't separate their claims and evidence into those neat little statements that you saw in your previous exercises. You must learn how to take someone else's messy argument and paraphrase it into those neat little statements. What is a paraphrase? Well, it's a restatement of ideas in different language for the sake of clarity and concision. And paraphrase is a really important tool in AP Lang. We use paraphrase whenever we perform any kind of text analysis. It's a critical skill in something like rhetorical analysis, because if you're analyzing the rhetorical function of an argument, you have to first paraphrase what the argument is before you can explain that function. So this is a good skill to have for creating appropriate text evidence in an analysis. When you paraphrase an argument, one or two sentences is really all it takes, unless the argument has an inordinately large number of evidence statements to it. Then it may take longer, but usually one or two sentences is fine. And you just need to paraphrase the claim and paraphrase all pieces of evidence in separate statements. How you order the parts of your sentence, whether you discuss the claim first or explain the evidence first, you just want to pick whatever way flows best. To demonstrate argument paraphrasing, let's look back at John Winthrop's A Model of Christian Charity. This is from the second paragraph. First, for the persons. We are a company professing ourselves fellow members of Christ, in which respect, only though we were absent from each other many miles and had our employments as far distant, yet we ought to account ourselves knit together by this bond of love, and live in the exercise of it, if we would have comfort in our being in Christ. This was notorious in the practice of the Christians in former times, as is testified in the Waldenses from the mouth of one of the adversaries, Anus Silvius, mutuo ament pene antiquam norent. They used to love any of their own religion even before they were acquainted with them. Sermons, by their very nature, tend to be a little repetitive, and this is no exception. To figure out exactly what his claim and evidence is here, we need to do a little bit of digging. This particular paragraph from his sermon is all about why the Puritans must love one another and practice that love. So what argument does Winthrop make about why the Puritans must love one another? The claim comes from somewhat near the beginning of the paragraph when he says, we ought to account ourselves knit together by this bond of love and live in the exercise of it. He gives two different reasons for why they have to do this, saying that we are a company professing ourselves fellow members of Christ, and later in the paragraph that this practice of love is what he's referring to. This was notorious in the practice of the Christians in former times. They used to love any of their own religion even before they were acquainted with them. If we were to paraphrase this argument, we might say something like this. Winthrop asserts how crucial it is that everyone within the Puritan community love one another. They must do this, he reasons, because they profess themselves to be Christians, and because this, he says, is what Christians have always done throughout history. Notice how I've made it very clear what he is claiming or asserting, and the ideas he provides to back up that claim, that assertion. Also note the phrases I've put into this statement to ensure that I am referring to something that Winthrop said and that I am not myself making this argument. I am merely paraphrasing what another writer has said. When writing a paraphrase, you'll get the hang of using the same sort of two-part structures over and over again, but here's some to get you started. The writer claims blank on account of blank. The author asserts blank, citing blank. The author argues blank, therefore, comma, blank, and so on. There's no one right way to paraphrase an argument. As long as you clearly identify the claim and all the evidence and it's clear which is which, that's the whole goal. Warning. Anytime you paraphrase the ideas of another writer, you run the risk of misrepresenting or mistaking what that writer is saying. Be careful that you don't ever put words in another writer's mouth, so to speak. Pay special attention to the claims that a writer is making. There's a big difference between claiming that X is Y or X was Y and X should be Y. Those are very different kinds of claims, and you don't want to mistake or misrepresent what an author is actually saying. You never want to say something that the writer isn't. It's time for a quick reading assignment. Read the text that's linked on the next slide, then respond to the open-ended questions with paraphrases.